Hey everybody, hope you're all doing good today. And today's topic I want to talk about is how big a water can a modern bass boat handle? Like what's the biggest waves that you could actually navigate in a modern bass boat? And I've been fascinated forever by like rough water, really big rough water. I can remember like when, man, I must have been 5 or 6 years old. My dad took me fishing, him and one of his friends, Jack Thompson, down at Grand Lake, and a thunderstorm came up. And we had, back when I was a little kid like that, Dad had it was a 16-foot Starcraft V-bottom with a 18 horsepower motor on it with a steering wheel. And I remember, you know, even though I was a little bitty, I remember this storm came up, like a thunderstorm, and we were, you know, going back to the ramp. And even though the waves probably weren't just a couple feet high, maybe they were probably 2 foot high, but when you're 5 or 6 years old, they probably seemed like they were towering. And I remember how terrified I was and crying to Dad. I was scared about the rough water. And you know, it just seems like from that moment on, I've just been really fascinated by really big water. And as I started the tournament circuit and I started traveling to the bigger lakes, I got more and more of a taste of that, until finally, when I started fishing up on the Great Lakes, Lake Erie, Lake Ontario, that type of stuff, that's when I really saw what real giant waves look like. You can't, you know, in man-made impoundments, they can get rough, but they can't get epically rough like the Great Lakes can, or the ocean. And you know, so it's just it's almost a surreal experience. If you've never been in a bass boat in really giant waves on the Great Lakes, and I'm talking, you know, 10 to 12 foot waves, rollers, you can't really grasp an appreciation for the power of nature until you're right there and you look up and you can't, and you're in a trough and you look up and there's a wave there, it's 10 foot over your head, just to the left or the right of you. I love that feeling. There's like, it's such an adrenaline rush, and it's such a experience that makes you feel alive, that I'm fascinated by water like that. And so I'm always thinking, I always thought in my mind, it's like, you know, how big of water, you know, can a bass boat handle? And I think that probably the most experienced big water boat drivers that there are out there are the anglers that fish the Great Lakes regularly. All those guys that live up and fish Lake Erie and Lake Ontario regularly, those guys have more experience in fishing giant waves than anybody in the country. And you know, I'd like to talk to some of them sometimes and sort of compare notes with my own experience. But for my own personal experience, you know, I've been on 3 different occasions where there were some really giant waves, twice on Lake Erie and once on Lake Ontario. And all 3 of these, but 2 of the times were in a tournament, and 1 of the time was just for fun. I was out there. But most of the tournament times I was out there, we had these waves that were in that probably 8 to 10 foot class. And these waves, they were spread pretty good distance apart. It's not like they were white capping over the top. So even though they were really big, they were navigable if you knew what you were doing with the boat. They could be dangerous, and they could definitely swamp you and tip you over. But if you know how to run that type of water, it's very achievable when the waves are like that. The biggest waves I've ever been in was, I was coming back from a tournament at Lake Champlain, and I stopped over on the shores of Lake Erie, I think it was near Buffalo or something, to spend the night on the way back to Missouri. And when I pulled over there was a front that was coming through, and the wind was blowing like 40 or 50 miles an hour on Lake Erie. And you looked out across there, you know, I was on the shores of the bank, I was in the harbor there, and you looked out across, and it looked like it wasn't even real. I mean, you could see white caps way out there, and I just wanted to see what it was like. And I just said, man, I'm just gonna run out there, you know, a couple miles out into the lake and just see what it's like to be in the Great Lakes in a 40 or 50 mile hour wind. So anyway, I ran out there, and as I got farther and farther out, and I didn't have to get very far out, but as I was getting farther out, they started getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And by the time I was 2 or 3 miles out into the lake, these waves were massive. I'm talking, I mean, it's hard to put a measure on it, but you know, they were in excess of 10 feet for sure. I mean, you know, but the thing about them is these waves, they were so giant that not only they were high, but it's like if you've seen those guys that are surfing a lot of times on those giant waves in Hawaii or wherever, Peru or wherever they see them at, you've got this wall of water that is like a gradual slope up of a mountain, and that's what these waves were like. They were just absolutely huge, and the thing that made me turn around is they started white capping over the top. And I know that, you know, once a wave does that, you know, that's when you can really get into some danger. But anyway, back to the question, how big of a wave can a bass boat take? And my answer to that is they could take as big a wave as they're out there. They could take a 40 or 50 foot wave depending upon how the wave is structured. If that wave is like a roller, where you don't have a lot of sharp peaks to it and a lot of water coming over the top of it, where you can actually run that particular wave almost parallel or at a 45-degree angle, you could theoretically run a 50-foot wave in the ocean with the bass boat. It's all about the peak on the wave is the thing about it. Because what happens is you can climb up a steep wave, you know, if you hit it at the right angle, but what happens when you get to the top of that peak, if that wave is breaking over the top, that's when a bass boat simply can't handle it. It just flip it right over. But if the peak was rounded, you know, you could just go right on over it. I always thought that it would be one of the greatest promotional advertisements for any boat company to do would be to get somebody and run across and drive from California to Hawaii in a bass boat, where you'd have to set up, you'd have to have a pilot boat with you to keep you, you know, to have gas for your boat, or, you know, equipment breakdowns or whatever. But I think that, you know, under the right conditions, that you could make it, you know, across the Pacific Ocean in a bass boat. I mean, they do it all the time in 25-foot sailboats, but, you know, rigged out right, if you had like a massive bilge pump system that could get the water out of there in a hurry, there's no reason why somebody couldn't do that unless you got one of those freak storms that, you know, had those peak white capping waves over the top of the waves. But anyway, I'd be curious to hear everybody's story on the big water that they had there. It's, you know, to me, there's something that's just very attractive to running in rough water. And, you know, I get seasick bad too. It's not like, I mean, if I'm in rough water like that, I will be getting sick, but I love it so much, and I look forward to it so much, and I'm in awe of it so much that I just love to be in that situation. I love to be in a bass boat in giant waves when everything's a little bit sketchy as far as, you know, being safe or not. There's just something about it that's just really cool. I just really love it. But anyway, send me some of your comments. You know, I'd love to hear what everybody has, maybe some experiences you've had in rough water. How big of waves do you think that a bass boat can handle? But personally, I think you could make it to Hawaii from California in one. And maybe one day somebody will do that and test it out. But anyway, hope you guys are doing good. We'll check in later.